Hello, I'm Nicole Roth.
And I'm Hannah Mosher. We are here today with a very special episode. We usually dive into passages, books of the Bible. We've been doing 10-minute studies. Today we're doing a undetermined length study on...
It can be still 10 minutes.
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay.
But we're going to be doing 4 tips on how to incorporate God or godly life into your kids' lives.
Yes. But before we dive into that, we want to remind you to like this video, subscribe to our channel, hit that notifications bell so you don't miss an episode, and share with all your family, friends, neighbors, and strangers.
So what we didn't realize is that we would kick this episode off with a little story. On my way here, I was about a 30-minute drive. I was picking up an order from Lowe's, and my husband calls me in a rage that my 3-year-old son decided to not only let our dog out the front door, and so she ran off, he decided to also let himself out the front door and wander across the street to our neighbor's house.
To look for the dog?
To look for the dog, he claims, and I do believe him. But I think it couldn't be a more appropriate message, at least to reflect as a parent.
You need Jesus.
We need Jesus because that was a bad decision.
So there's going to be an overarching theme through these 4 ideas, and that theme is being intentional with your kids. Because if you're not intentional with growing their relationship with Jesus or teaching them or modeling how to do that, they won't have that sort of direction or influence that they need. And so being intentional on how to influence your child in their walk with Christ is huge.
The other underlying arch theme that I want to point out too is that as a parent, being intentional and purposeful with your own spiritual walk. Because if you're setting aside all this time to pour into your kid, but you're not being poured into yourself, you're only setting yourself up for failure.
And the first intentionality idea is setting a specific, almost devotional time, just like you would do for yourself. Teach them and do it with them. So for us, our almost 4-year-old daughter, we do this most often before bed. But you can do this before bed, before nap time, or in the middle of the day chill time, or even in the morning, or whatever works best for your family. So that's like the best thing about this is you do it when it's best for your family. And so for us, what we do is she has her children's Bible, and we review some of the stories we've read in the past, and then we read a new one, and then we talk to her about it. And sometimes that does mean like not necessarily reading word for word from that Bible, but like if you know the story, tell it in a way that your child can understand so that they can make the applications that they need to, which we'll talk about in a second.
What our family does is very similar. We also have a kids like children's picture Bible. Really, it just highlights the big stories of the Bible.
Sure.
I put that in air quotes. And we sit down with Micah and we read a Bible story every night. And we just kind of ask him if he remembers it. And he's very young and he doesn't quite pay attention. And so we're kind of working on that. And then Phoebe, she's not even 2 yet. So we haven't really done too much, but we'll get into prayer in a little bit because that's really the segue into a godly lifestyle that we're using with her.
Honestly, I think part of that intentionality with our youngest ones is, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't feed them yourself, obviously, but I don't know how it works here at your church, but Maddox even going to Sunday school in the 2-year-old class, he's still getting some sort of idea of who Jesus is, I guess. Maybe not necessarily knowing who Jesus is or like understanding exactly, but like he's getting into a routine where he knows now, like he'll sit and eat his snack and watch the little clip video, and then he'll listen to whatever everyone else is saying, but he's getting in that routine to set him up for success.
The other thing, again, that underlying arch theme of parenting and you reflecting on your own devotional time for this first tip. My kids walk in on me doing devotions all the time. Admittedly, I've had a crazy week, so it didn't happen this week at all. But usually, Mommy, what are you doing? Oh, I'm reading the Bible. Or Phoebe will walk in and go, Mommy. And then I'll say, oh, do you want to
color on your journal?
Yes, and she'll color on my journal. But I'll pick her up and I'll kind of like read out loud to her. And so just being intentional in that way too. Being intentional with like allowing them to catch you. As a mom, it's really tempting to do devotions during their nap times or during their play times or their show times. But it's really cool, and I think it's really powerful and speaks a lot when, they're coloring on the table and I'm doing devotions and those kinds of things. And so
absolutely.
letting them see that, and that'll come up in all of the tips too, but just as the first one.
Yeah, no, that's super important. It's super huge for your kids to see you and your walk with Jesus as well. So, and that's you modeling it and showing them that that's how we should be living our life, is continuing to grow in our knowledge of the word, because that's like one of the only ways to be closer to God. Obviously there's more than one way, but it is the most important way besides prayer. So, which comes to our next idea, is prayer. First and foremost, there are times when they see us praying for meals or at church, and letting them know that when we are praying, it is a conversation with God. And so whatever is on their heart or whatever they want to say to God, even if you're thinking like, that was completely silly, like that was on their heart, and letting them know that they did a really good job is super important.
And I've been having Micah pray over our dinner, and he's been doing a really good job.
He's such a gentleman.
He is a gentleman, indubitably. But we have him pray over our meal, and I am pretty strict with him because he likes to goof off and he gets embarrassed, and then he starts acting out. And so I say, no, we are talking to God now, and making them know that it's not a bad or negative thing, but it's a serious thing at the same time as a fun thing. You get to have this conversation with God, and you get to practice faith because you can't see who you're talking to. And my favorite time is bedtime. I'll take the two kids up together, and I'll have Micah pray over the day, and he highlights what the favorite parts of his day were.
Yeah.
Dear God, we love you. Thank you for the park, and things like that. And then I'll say, okay, Phoebe, you pray, and she completely mumbles and then goes, amen.
Yes.
So it's just super fun.
Oh my goodness, it's so funny. I don't know where Maddox got this. He's my 2-year-old. Whenever we say, okay, it's your turn to pray, Maddox, he'll also kind of mumble, but it's like a whisper. He'll go, amen! And he whispers, and I don't know why he thinks whisper, but then he'll also like fold his hands and look at the ground, and you have to like really like listen to what he's saying, but that's pretty much his main as Mama Dada, Sissy, and Mina.
I think it's really cool as a husband-wife combo. When you learn how to pray in front of each other, you learn that like you get to see a side of that person that you never got to see.
Yes.
But here's the catch. When you hear your kids pray, you're hearing yourself. You're hearing the words that stand out to them, and your script, so to speak, that you use and what you might pray like. So I'm really glad that Micah hasn't heard a lot of my prayers, because I'm pretty sure I swear in a lot of my prayers. But not recently, because we've had good times. But I've noticed Eric, he always just expresses his love for God first. And so Micah has started, I can hear Eric in his prayers. And he'll go, dear God, we love you. And it's so cool because I know exactly where that's coming from. So if you want to hear what you sound like or your spouse sounds like, you can hear it through your kids too.
That is such a good point. I love that so much. So the third idea we wanted to hit was having your child create an application on their own. And what I mean by this is we don't necessarily always have to spoon feed our child what they should be thinking. And so this is a great opportunity for you to see what's going on in their head. So for example, if you're reading the Adam and Eve story, like we did probably like a year ago or whatever with Sage when we started reading her children's Bible religiously. When you are going through that story, without necessarily spoon feeding Sage ideas of things that are happening in her life, just take a second and see what they think. Let your child process what this story means to them in their life, and ask them questions that allows them to answer it without giving them ideas from your thought process. Now obviously you're going to do that to some extent, especially in the beginning, but especially when you're teaching them how to make those applications with Bible stories. Again, she's almost 4, so I feel like after a year of modeling those things, at some point on her own, she can think of little anecdotes or little things that are happening in her life that can connect to some of these Bible stories. So I guess what I'm trying to say is being patient and allowing your child to process the story on their own. It'll really surprise you, and then it gives you an opportunity to learn about your child, if that makes sense.
Our examples have more to do with discipline and fear. And by discipline, I more mean Micah learning right from wrong.
Yeah.
He's entered the phase where he's realized he was able to lie once about throwing or something. And so now he tries to get out of it. But we're trying to get him to think, instead of being like, that's wrong, we're trying to kind of nurture him, realizing like, I will get in a lot more trouble or dig myself a hole if I lie about this. And so we're at the beginning stages of that, so we do kind of have to feed a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
But the bigger one that's more applicable in what you're saying is the fear. And so thunder and bugs were his biggest fears in this time. And we've just kind of been talking about how God makes the lightning and the thunder and the bugs, and he's in control. And so just leaving him with that, and then weeks, months go by, and him and I were gardening outside, and he said, "Oh, Mom, there's so many bugs." I said, "Oh, are you scared?" He said, "No, because God made bugs, so I don't need to be scared."
That is
and
so
just,
good.
So like those, you be patient. And I mean, I can get mad at him for being afraid of bugs because I don't want to kill him. I want him killing them for me because I'm afraid of bugs. But that said, for me to be patient and to let him figure this out on his own, he may not necessarily believe that yet, but he's saying the right things, and I think he's finally, it's clicking, at least the fear part of it.
Absolutely. And then the last thing we wanted to touch on, and again, this might seem so easy, but reviewing what you did at church, and not only asking your child what they learned, but I was thinking about this today. Brandon and I never talked to Sage. Okay, and Maddox eventually. Hannah and I also talk about this. Maddox and Phoebe are just kind of like
the derp
ding-dongs right
They're
now.
kind of ding-dongs, just running into doors. And
it's fine.
It's great.
It's fine. So whenever we're making these examples, we're obviously making them with our oldest children,
which
are
is 4 and 3.
So it's fine.
Yeah.
But there haven't been any times that we've shared with Sage, like, oh, what did you learn at Sunday school? This is what we learned. And I want to start doing that. I want to start sharing with Sage what Daddy and I learned at church, because that's huge.
I think that's a really good idea. And I would say that we've kind of started doing that. And the reason for that is our whole adult and children's curriculums are taking a shift where everything is connected. So if the pastor's preaching on prayer, then our 5th and 6th graders are talking about prayer that week. And so are the kids, and then the nursery is listening to a nursery rhyme about prayer. Like, there's some kind of connection, so we're able to have that open conversation. But I will say, asking your kids what they learned, talking to them about what you learned, but also you should be asking the ministry lead of that children's church what they're learning as well. And I think that it's a really important step that's missed, that accountability factor, because a lot of children's ministers, especially at that age, are volunteers. And even more of them are uneducated. Even if they're paid, they're uneducated in that way. And that's a really hard job.
It is.
And I would never want to do it. So props to them. But you don't always know what they're supposed to be learning. And so if you can find out what they're supposed to be learning, then you can guide them towards what they're learning if they didn't exactly get it in class.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I like where Sage goes to preschool right now, because on the Sunday before school, we get the Bible stories, and because Sage goes to a Christian preschool, and so we get the Bible stories and like the concepts that they're learning. So it's really cool that we can have those conversations leading into class and then recapping them after class. And I wanted to remind everyone that Jesus adored children. He explains that he wants us to have faith like a child. And during this thought process today, when Hannah and I decided this is what we wanted to talk about, it reminded me of the story in Matthew 19 when the disciples were rebuking the children from going forward. And what did Jesus say?
Let the children come to me.
Yes, he said, Jesus said, let the children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. We need to do our part to our children and influence and model what it's like to have a relationship with Jesus, because the kingdom of heaven also belongs to them, not just us as adults who think that we have it all together when we don't.
And I think that it's also important too, as much as you want to be a good influence for your kids, in that respect, let your kids influence you. That's a phrase I've held on to for a very long time, the faith like a child, because I do think back, I would say very, very young, but I knew that I loved God. I didn't understand everything that meant, but I knew I loved him and I knew that he loved me. And then eventually we got into the actual gospel story, and that said, let your kid, watch your kids talk to God, and watch that almost naivety and that just longing, and that, they're practicing full-blown faith. We at least have some education in it. They're just learning, but they're just openly talking to this thing, I'm quoting again, that they can't see, and they're just going off of what we have to say about it and what their Sunday school teachers have to say about it. And so keeping that influence for yourself as well as influencing them.
Absolutely. We want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks.
As we talked about growing not only our own faith with Jesus, but our children's.
And remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, to turn on the notifications so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to share with all of your friends, family, neighbors, and strangers.
We'll see you next week as we talk about the armor of God.
Bye-bye now.